It is 2 in the morning, and you are still awake. The room is dark, the house is quiet, but your thumb keeps moving, refreshing the same conversation, waiting for 3 dots that will not come. You tell yourself you will stop in a minute. You do not stop. You check again. Nothing. You check again. Still nothing. The silence on the screen starts to feel like an answer, even though it isn't one. There is a bowl of milk rice waiting for us on the bank of a river in northern India, 25 centuries ago. We will get to that bowl. Not yet. Because before we understand the answer, we have to sit inside the question that the Buddha sat inside first. The question of why a comfortable life can still feel like this. The Buddha had a name for this feeling. He called it Dukkha. It is usually translated as suffering, but that word is too small. Dukkha is the low hum of unease that runs under a life that will not hold still. The tightness in your chest when something good is about to end. The flatness that follows a moment you thought would finally be enough. The quiet dread that shows up on an ordinary Tuesday for no reason you can name. This is not weakness. This is not bad luck. This is not a personal failing that only happens to you. This is the shape of a mind that has not yet seen how things actually work. And here is the strange part. You do not need a broken life to feel it. You can have the job, the relationship, the body that still works, the message that finally arrives, and still feel this hum underneath it all. Get the promotion, and within days the mind is already reaching for the next thing. Get the reply you were waiting for, and the relief lasts an evening before some new absence takes its place. This is not what most people expect when they first hear this teaching. They assume the Buddha is describing misery, some dramatic, visible suffering that only shows up in hospitals and funerals. He is not. He is describing something quieter and far more common. The low-grade dissatisfaction that follows you into a good day. The tiny disappointment when a moment you looked forward to turns out to be just a moment, ordinary and over too fast. The Buddha knew this feeling from the inside because he lived the opposite of a broken life. And that is where his story, and ours, begins. Before he was the Buddha, he was a prince named Siddhartha Gautama, and his father gave him everything a father could give to keep pain away from his son. Silk, music, gardens designed so that nothing ugly could enter, servants trained to remove any sign of sickness, age, or death before the young prince's eyes ever landed on it. 3 palaces built for 3 seasons so that even the weather would never inconvenience him. For years it worked. Then on a series of rides beyond the palace walls, the world let itself in anyway. He saw an old man, bent and slow, his body telling a truth no silk curtain could hide. He saw a sick man, shaking with a fever no doctor in the palace could reach. He saw a corpse being carried to the river, and he understood, for the first time, that this ending was his too. Later, on the same road, he saw a wandering ascetic, calm in a way none of the wealth around Siddhartha had ever managed to produce, and something in him recognized that calm as the only thing left worth searching for. Here is what most people miss about this part of the story. Siddhartha was not suffering because he lacked comfort. He was suffering because comfort could not protect him from change. And once he saw that, the palace stopped working as a hiding place. He left that same night, his wife Yasodhara and his newborn son Rahula asleep behind him. Not out of coldness, but because he had run out of ways to pretend the ache under his comfortable life was not there. This is the first noble truth. Life carries dukkha, not only in pain, but in the pleasant things too, because anything pleasant is also temporary, and some part of you already knows it. The Buddha had a word for this constant motion, anicca, impermanence. Nothing holds still long enough for you to finally relax into it. Not your body, not your mood, not the person you love, not the version of yourself you worked so hard to become. You know this feeling, even if you have never had a word for it. You know it when a face changes, when a voice goes quiet on the other end of a phone that used to ring all the time, when a season of your life ends and you are still standing in the doorway of it, waiting for it to come back. There is a story from the early Buddhist texts that shows this with more weight than any explanation could. A woman named Kisa Gotami lost her only child. She could not accept it. She carried the small body from house to house, begging for medicine, refusing to believe that no medicine could work. Neighbors looked away. Some pitied her. None could help. Someone finally sent her to the Buddha because if anyone had a cure, people said it would be him. He told her he could help on one condition. She had to bring him a single mustard seed, but it had to come from a house that had never known death. She went door to door with new hope in her chest. Every house had mustard seeds, every single one. But every house also had a story. A husband lost, a mother lost, a child lost before this one. In a year nobody wanted to talk about anymore. House after house, the seed was easy to find, and the house untouched by death was nowhere. By the time she returned to the Buddha, she was not carrying a mustard seed. She was carrying something closer to peace, the understanding that her grief was not a punishment aimed at her alone. It was the shape of being alive at all, shared by every single household in the village, whether they said so out loud or not. This is not comfortable to hear, but it is honest. And honesty here is a form of respect for how much you have already carried. So far, we have looked at the diagnosis. Life carries an ache built into its very structure, and no amount of good fortune removes it completely. If this is the first time you are hearing the Buddha's teaching explained this way, this channel exists to walk through the rest of it with you, one teaching at a time. Consider staying for what comes next, because the diagnosis is not where the Buddha stopped. He also found the cause. And the cause is closer to home than most people expect. Here's the part nobody tells you about suffering. It is not something that simply happens to you from the outside. Most of it, you are building yourself in real time without noticing. The Buddha named the cause in the second noble truth. The word is tanha, usually translated as craving, though thirst may be closer. Not craving in the small sense of wanting dessert. Craving in the deep sense of the mind constantly reaching for something to hold on to so it can stop feeling the discomfort of things moving. Underneath tanha sits another word, avijja, often translated as ignorance, though it has nothing to do with intelligence. Avijja means not seeing clearly how things actually work. It is the assumption, running quietly under almost every decision you make, that some person, some purchase, some achievement will finally be solid enough to lean on permanently. Tanha is the reaching. Avijja is the misunderstanding that makes the reaching feel necessary in the first place. Tanha shows up in three forms. Craving for pleasant experience, more comfort, more pleasure, more of the good feeling before it fades. Craving for becoming, to be someone else, somewhere else, some future version of yourself who has finally arrived, finally enough, finally safe. And craving for non-existence, the urge to numb out, disappear, scroll until the mind goes quiet, or escape a moment entirely rather than feel it. You have felt at least one of these tonight. That phone in the dark is not really about the message. It is about the ache underneath, the reaching for reassurance that you matter, that you are not alone, that the silence means something other than what it probably means. And this is where the teaching becomes uncomfortable, because it means the suffering is not only about what happened to you, it is about the second thing your mind does after it happens. The early teachers describe this with an image of two arrows. The first arrow is the pain itself, the loss, the insult, the diagnosis, the silence on the phone. That arrow you cannot always avoid. Life will fire it at you regardless of how well you live, regardless of how carefully you plan, regardless of how good a person you have tried to be. The second arrow is different. It is the arrow you fire at yourself afterward. The story that this should not be happening. The judgment that you should be handling it better. The fear stacked on top of the pain, and then the fear about the fear. And then, if you are not careful, a third and fourth arrow made entirely out of your own thoughts about your own thoughts. This is not escape from feeling. This is not pretending pain is not real. This is not becoming cold to your own life. This is learning to feel the first arrow fully without loading a second one on top of it out of habit. Stay with me here, because this next part matters. Some people hear the phrase, let go of craving, and picture a monk who has stopped caring about anything. The story of a man named Angulimala says otherwise. Before he encountered the Buddha, he was a feared killer, a man whose mind had been shaped by violence until violence felt like the only language he knew, until his name itself had become a warning parents gave their children. And yet, in the presence of the Buddha's teaching, something in him turned. He put down the life he had been living and became, by tradition's account, a devoted follower of the path, walking calmly through the same villages that once fled at the sound of his name. His story is not proof that people are simple to change. It is proof that the mind is not a fixed object. It is a pattern built over time, and a pattern that was built can also be rebuilt, slowly, deliberately, one honest choice at a time. Even Ananda, the Buddha's closest attendant for decades, struggled with this. Tradition remembers him as deeply devoted and also deeply attached, grieving hard, holding on hard, needing the Buddha's presence in a way that pulled at him long after he had heard every teaching there was to hear. If craving could still visit the man standing closest to the source of this wisdom, it was never going to skip you or me. So, if craving is the cause, is there a way out? The third noble truth says yes. Suffering, or at least the extra suffering we build ourselves, can end. Not through more willpower thrown at the problem. Through seeing clearly enough that the reaching finally loosens on its own. The fourth noble truth is the path there. And the Buddha called it the Eightfold Path. Not 8 rules to memorize and recite, but 8 areas of a life examined honestly. Right view, seeing things as they actually are, not as craving wants them to be. Right intention, checking what is actually driving your next action, whether it is generosity or fear wearing generosity as a mask. Right effort, putting energy where it helps instead of everywhere at once, exhausting yourself trying to control what was never yours to control. And right in the center of it, sati, mindfulness, paying attention to what is happening now instead of living 3 steps ahead in a future your mind has invented to feel safer. Now we return to that bowl of milk rice. Before the Buddha became the Buddha, Siddhartha nearly died trying to end his suffering through the opposite extreme. For 6 years, he starved himself, believing that punishing the body would free the mind. It did not. He was a collection of bones and willpower, sitting by a river with barely enough strength to bathe in it. And he was no closer to peace than the prince he used to be. Then a woman named Sujata found him by the river, mistook his starving frame for a spirit answering her prayers, and offered him a bowl of milk rice out of simple human kindness. He ate it. Some of the ascetics who had been fasting beside him saw this and walked away in disgust, certain he had failed. And in that single, unremarkable act, something clicked anyway. Not indulgence, not punishment. A middle way between the 2 extremes he had been running between his whole life. This is what the second arrow teaching and the middle way have in common, if you look closely. Both are about proportion. You do not end suffering by numbing every feeling into silence, and you do not end it by amplifying every feeling into a crisis. You end it by meeting each moment with the amount of attention it actually needs. No more, no less. That midnight phone-checking loop from the beginning of this video is the same pattern in smaller clothing. The craving is real. The ache underneath it is real. What changes with practice is the second arrow, the story that turns a quiet moment into a small emergency. Mindfulness researchers studying attention and emotional reactivity have found something the Buddha's teaching already assumed 25 centuries ago. That the moment you notice a craving instead of obeying it, the space between the urge and the action gets a little wider. Not all of it, not instantly, but enough to breathe. Enough to put the phone down, look at the ceiling, and let the ache pass through you instead of pulling you by the wrist. There's one more thing worth knowing here. Sati, mindfulness, is not the same as thinking about your problems more. It is almost the opposite. It is dropping the running commentary, the should have, the what if, the what does this mean about me, and simply noticing the raw sensation underneath, the tightness in the chest, the heat behind the eyes, the restlessness in the hands. Named plainly, without the story attached, the first arrow rarely lasts as long as the mind assumes it will. It is the second arrow, built entirely out of commentary, that keeps the wound open long after the original moment has passed. 3 things worth carrying out of this video. First, suffering is not a punishment for something you did wrong. It is the natural friction of being alive inside a world that never holds still, and everyone standing in a Buddhist temple, a hospital waiting room, or a dark bedroom at 2 in the morning shares that same friction. Second, you are adding a second arrow to almost every pain you feel, usually without noticing. And that second arrow is the one part of this you actually have some say over. The first arrow was never the problem you could fully control. The second one is. Third, and this is the one worth sitting with. The end of suffering was never about the end of feeling. It was about the moment you stop demanding that life hold still long enough to finally make you happy and start meeting it exactly as it is, one honest moment at a time. Which arrow have you been carrying without knowing it? Tell me below. Because somewhere between a prince who could not outrun an old man on a road, and a mother carrying a mustard seed from house to house, and a starving man who finally accepted a bowl of milk rice from a stranger, the same teaching is waiting for you. Not to make the pain disappear, to make you free enough to hold it without it holding you.